Well, I'm quite overwhelmed because the earlier recipients of the award were truly distinguished. It's very hard for me to compare myself to them. So it is a really great honor. I have several areas I'm working in. One is bankruptcy, um, and more specifically, Chapter 13s, which are 5-year uh, financial organization plans that can often be used to preserve a home that is in foreclosure and at the same time deal with other financial issues such as very high interest car loans and other creditors. And we've been fortunate to have a lot of good luck in some of the ones that we file. Often our clients have very limited income, like they're just on Social Security, and they may not have made a mortgage payment in a year or two, are being contacted by all these creditors. And yet, once there's a financial plan and there's a sort of beginning and an end to it, we've been really surprised how people will kind of on their very limited incomes, make the payments. So that's one area. A second area concerns something called land contracts. And land contracts are kind of in between a lease and a mortgage. And the people who get involved in land contracts are usually people whose credit ratings do not qualify them for a mortgage. So they've been turned down by a bank or they haven't even applied. And so instead, they enter into a contract from a seller to buy property where the seller holds the deed until the payments are complete. And these contracts are almost totally unregulated by New York, and they often have very one-sided terms. Like we had a recent case where there were late fees of $175 a month. And by the time the client reached us, they owed over $2,000 in late fees under the contract. We got a very good decision from the court in that case, limiting the late fees. But it's a constant problem. People who have been dealing with landlords for years, they're often desperate to become homeowners. And so this is the only vehicle available for them. And yet they can be paying for some of these contracts go for like 20 years. They complete the payments. There have never been proper receipts or ledgers. And all of a sudden the seller is saying, oh, by the way, you owe me another $4,000 or $5,000, and they're kind of stuck. So that's another area. And then a third area involves mobile home parks, um, where there are a lot of issues. And one of the issues we've been working on are limits on rent increases. Often in mobile home parks, especially among older people, they own the mobile home, but it's not really mobile. It's kind of very often these mobile homes are like 20 or 30 years old. To move them would be expensive or even impossible because they'd be damaged. So these residents of the park, they're like hostages of the park. And New York State has tried to regulate rent increases, but it's one thing in the parks. It's one thing to have a law in the books. It's another thing to enforce it. So those are three areas that I've been working in. When I graduated from law school, I joined Vista, and that was a program that sent people all over the country or all over the state at fairly minimum wages, but they would be attached to not-for-profits. And you would go with a group, so there'd be like 10 Vista volunteers for a specific group. And so Vista in its wisdom sent me to this very rural area. And then I was quite fortunate because there was a really wonderful director of the legal services program, and he had been in the Peace Corps in Guatemala. Then he went to Yale Law School. Then he worked in the South Bronx, and he was both very idealistic and a brilliant lawyer. So that really got me interested in legal services, and I've kind of been there ever since. There's just constant interactions between uh, the lawyers and paralegals in the program. We're just constantly consulting each other, and there are also statewide groups. There's a statewide foreclosure group, for instance, where you get a lot of ideas from all kinds of different people. And in bankruptcy, there was an outstanding bankruptcy attorney in the New York City and metropolitan area. And so I got together with him, and we actually sponsored at one of the partnership conferences a presentation by one of the bankruptcy judges. But it was just great working with him because he had a sort of different perspective, because of the nature of practice in the New York City and New York City metropolitan area, which is a little different than upstate. Without a lawyer in areas such as housing or family or disability, such as Social Security disability, it's very hard for people without a lawyer to understand their rights and to also just marshal the facts in their case so that whoever is deciding the case, whether it's a judge or an administrative law judge, really sees the person as a human being with all kinds of challenges, and to kind of put that together in a way that can be appreciated and is compelling can just make all the difference in the world. It's very hard to do on your own, but with an advocate, it becomes much more possible. We really appreciate the support by the New York State Bar Association. And I think there are ways that more interaction between the legal services community and the the state and local bar associations could be very helpful. One area, of course, is funding, because in most legal services offices and legal aid offices, the phone just rings off the hook with people who have very serious problems, and it's hard to turn away people like that. And so the bar associations help in getting more funding, perhaps in developing more in the way of scholarship programs for promising law school graduates to work in legal services. All of that could be enormously helpful. Also, the bar the bar associations may be in a position to offer very high quality trainings geared to legal services work. I mean, there are already a lot of trainings, but legal services work is often fairly specialized, and to have trainings that, address pretty specific issues that come up, in the legal services context, would be, really helpful. And then a third area would be having the the legislature and other governmental organizations maybe hearing more from the Bar Association on issues affecting poor people, and having the Bar Association at the table when a lot of legislation is enacted, because it's one thing to have laws on the books, but it's another thing to try to enforce them. And so to have the practical experience of advocates who are trying to enforce these laws and then in turn adjust the statutes, or have the statutes respond in some way. And I think the bar associations may have more access to some of the governmental decision makers than just legal services offices, or at least in combination, it would be more persuasive and informative. Well, I'm so glad to be in their company. I don't think I deserve it, but I'm very glad, and you often get inspired, when you hear what they've been up to and what they've been able to accomplish.